Clara Whitcomb stood in the freight yard with railroad suit on her hem, one carpet bag at her feet, and every face in Mercy Crossing staring as if widowhood had made her contagious. The noon wind pushed dust against her black dress while Mr. Griggs, the station agent, held up her unpaid ticket and called her too late, too poor, and too much trouble for any decent household. A rival rancher laughed from the mercantile steps, offering $2 for her bag and nothing for her dignity. Then Jonah Hale, a lonely cowboy rancher with storm-gray eyes and a scarred leather coat, rode in for flour and nails and saw not shame, but a woman still standing. Before we begin, leave your country name below and tell me where this western night is reaching you. Subscribe if stories of rejected brides, protective cowboys, and hard-earned love keep you listening. The train had already pulled away when Clara Whitcomb learned there would be no room for her on the next one. It left behind a long ribbon of black smoke, a shiver in the rails, and a silence that seemed to fall hardest around her thin shoulders. She stood on the platform of Mercy Crossing with dust clinging to the bottom of her black dress and her widow's veil pinned badly to her hat, because her fingers had trembled too much that morning to do it right. The town looked at her the way towns look at trouble when it arrives without money. Men leaned in the shade outside the mercantile. Two women in church bonnets paused near the pump and whispered behind gloved hands. A freckled boy stopped sweeping the boardwalk just to stare. Clara kept one hand on the handle of her carpet bag and the other pressed against the pocket where her last folded letter lay soft from being read too many times. The letter said her husband's final wages would be waiting in Mercy Crossing. The station agent said otherwise. Mr. Alden Griggs stood at the ticket window with his thumbs hooked in his vest and his chin lifted like he had been appointed judge over all misfortune. He had a narrow mouth, a polished watch chain, and eyes that never settled on Clara's face when they could settle on her worn sleeves instead. "Mrs. Whitcomb," he said loudly enough for the platform to hear, "your husband's account is closed." Closed means closed. Clara swallowed. Her throat felt raw from the long chain ride and the cold biscuits she had eaten 2 days earlier. "Mr. Griggs, the railroad office in Abilene told me there were wages due. Samuel worked the north grade until the accident. Your husband also left debts. Your husband also left debts. He left me a widow." That quiet sentence should have ended the matter. It did not. Mr. Griggs sighed, as though her grief were a small inconvenience placed on his counter. The company paid for burial, freight costs, and the transport of his effects. "You arrived 6 weeks late. I was sick. Misfortune does not change bookkeeping." Laughter broke from the mercantile steps. Clara turned just enough to see Silas Voss watching her from beneath the brim of a pearl gray hat. He was a broad man with a handsome face gone hard from always getting his way. His boots were clean for a rancher's boots, his coat expensive, and his smile had no warmth in it. "Bookkeeping is the one honest thing left in this town," Silas called. "If a debt is owed, a debt is owed." Clara had never met him, but she knew his name. Samuel had written of him once in a hurried hand, saying Voss owned half the valley and wanted the other half. Samuel had said nothing more, but the ink on that letter had been scratched so hard it nearly tore the paper. Mr. Griggs held up a slip. "You owe $12.40 for the portion of fare not covered by the office. If you cannot pay, your bag might be held until the account is satisfied." "My bag," Clara whispered. "It contains property that can be assessed." Her hand tightened around the handle. Inside were 2 dresses, a Bible, a cracked photograph of her mother, Samuel's old work coat, and a small tin of buttons. That was all. It was not much to the world, but it was everything she could carry. Mrs. Tully, the boarding house keeper, stood near the pump with the church women. Clara had gone to her first before speaking to Griggs, asking if there might be a bed for one night until the matter of the wages was settled. Mrs. Tully had looked Clara over and said, "I don't take women with uncertain accounts. Now she watched with the same pinched concern one might give a muddy dog near a clean porch. Clara lifted her chin, though it cost her. I will find work and pay what is owed. What kind of work? Silas asked. You don't look fit for ranch work. Too plain for the saloon. Too thin for a cook. Too late for the train. Mercy crossings full up on widows. The town laughed because a powerful man had given permission. Clara's cheeks burned. She did not cry. She had cried on the train until there seemed to be no water left inside her. She had cried over Samuel's grave when no one from the railroad would meet her eyes. She had cried in a rented room while fever shook her bones and the last of her coins disappeared into medicine. Now she only stood. A bell jingled at the mercantile door. A man stepped out, carrying a sack of flour over one shoulder and a coil of wire in the other hand. He wore a dusty brown hat pulled low, a sheepskin coat scarred by weather, and a revolver that looked old enough to have belonged to his father. His beard was dark, his jaw set, and his eyes were gray. That made Clara think of winter light on frozen creek water. He set the flour in the back of a buckboard without hurrying. Nobody laughed then. Afternoon, Jonah, the storekeeper called, suddenly polite. The man did not answer at once. He looked from Mr. Griggs to Clara, then to the slip in Griggs' hand. What's the widow owe? He asked. Clara stiffened. Sir, I did not ask you. I know you didn't. His voice was low, rough from disuse more than anger. I asked him. Mr. Griggs cleared his throat. This is a private railroad matter. Then, speak quiet. You've made it public enough. The station agent's face reddened. $12.40. Jonah reached into his coat and counted coins onto the counter. Not grandly. Not like a hero in a story. He counted them as a man counts winter feed, knowing every penny has already been promised somewhere else. Clara stared at the money. No, Jonah, no, Jonah turned to her. It isn't charity. It looks like charity. Then we'll call it a loan. I do not know you, no, ma'am. And you do not know me. I know what a crowd looks like when it's enjoying another person's hunger. That silenced even the church women. Silas Voss stepped down from the mercantile porch. Careful, Hale. A man's reputation can sour when he starts collecting stray women from the depot. Jonah's gaze moved to him slowly. A man's reputation can sour quicker when he insults one. Silas smiled. You aiming to answer for her? I'm aiming to buy nails. And a widow, it seems. Clara felt that one like a slap. Before she could speak, Jonah took one step off the boardwalk. He was not as broad as Silas, but he carried stillness like a loaded rifle. Say that again, he said. The street seemed to hold its breath. Silas looked at the faces around him, judging what he could win and what he might lose. Then he gave a small laugh and lifted his hands. No offense meant. Then none should have been spoken. Jonah turned back to Clara. His voice changed. It did not soften much, but it lost its edge. There's a winter storm due before dark. My ranch is 12 miles north. I've got a spare room, a stove that works most days, and a ledger that needs copying, because my handwriting shames the alphabet. If you want work for one night's shelter and a ride back when the road clears, I can offer that. Mrs. Tully gasped softly, delighted by scandal. Clara heard it. Jonah did too, he said, louder. Mrs. Mercer and her boy live on my place. She keeps house since her husband died last spring. You won't be alone under my roof. That changed the shape of the offer. Not pity, not purchase. Work, shelter, and a boundary drawn in public where everyone could see it. Still, Clara's pride rose like a wall. I can repay the $12. I expect you will. I expect that too. The wind lifted dust across the platform. Clara looked at the railroad tracks stretching away from town. Then at the ticket window. then at the faces waiting for her to either break or behave in a way they could judge. Hunger made her knees weak. Shame made her fingers cold. But beneath both, something stubborn remained. She picked up her carpetbag before Mr. Griggs could touch it. "I will take the work," she said, "not the pity." Jonah gave one nod. Fair enough. As he helped her into the buckboard, nobody spoke. The flour sacks, coffee tin, nails, salt pork, and a length of stovepipe rattled behind them. Clara sat straight, hands folded over her bag, while Jonah climbed up beside her and took the reins. Silas Voss watched from the street, his smile gone thin. Jonah clicked to the horses. That morning, he had ridden into Mercy Crossing for supplies. By sundown, he would leave with an unwanted railroad widow beside him, and the whole town would remember the dust rising behind his wagon. The road north out of Mercy Crossing was rutted hard beneath a sky the color of old tin. The first flakes came before they reached the dry creek crossing. They did not fall gently. They came sideways, sharp with wind, striking Clara's veil and melting against her cheeks. Jonah did not ask her questions at first. That made him different from most people she had met since Samuel died. People asked questions when they wanted to measure grief, weigh guilt, or find a crack where gossip might enter. Jonah only kept the horses steady and watched the road. After a mile, he reached behind the seat, pulled a folded wool blanket from under the flour, and set it between them. "Cole will get through that dress." Clara looked at the blanket but did not take it. "I am all right." "No, ma'am. You're proud. That isn't the same." She turned her face toward him sharply. He kept his eyes on the road. Pride has its uses, so does wool. The plainness of it disarmed her. She took the blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. It smelled faintly of horses' smoke and cedar. She had not realized how badly she was shaking until warmth touched her. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." They rode another stretch in silence. When the town was a low blur behind them, Clara said, "Do you often pay strangers debts?" "No, son." "Why mine?" Jonah's hands tightened once on the reins. "Because I've stood where you stood." She waited, but he offered no more. The snow thickened. The horses leaned into it, their manes blown sideways. Clara could hear the creak of leather, the knock of wheels, the far cry of wind running along open ground. At last Jonah said, "Mercy Crossing is a hard town for anyone who arrives with empty pockets. Harder if they arrive alone. You seem to know it well. I know the land around it. The town and I keep our distance, yet they know your name. They know my debts, my fences, and the number of cattle I lost last winter. That passes for knowing a man." Clara studied him from the corner of her eye. There was something tired in the set of his shoulders, something older than his face. He could not have been much past 38, but the silence around him felt like it had lived there for years. "Mr. Hale, Jonah is fine. Folks who call me Mr. Hale usually want money or a vote." Samira Whitcomb. "I heard then. You also heard what they called me." "I heard what they called themselves by saying it." She looked down at her gloved hands. The left glove had been mended twice. The right had lost a button. "I missed the train west because I was told to come here first. The railroad office said Samuel final pay would be here. When I reached Abilene, I took sick fever. By the time I could travel, every dollar was gone." "Samuel was your husband?" "Yes, railroad man, brakeman, then line inspector. He died north of here when a trestle gave way." Jonah nodded once, not with polite surprise, but as if he remembered hearing of it. "3 men killed? 4? He glanced at her then. "I'm sorry." Clara braced for the next words. People usually followed sorrow with curiosity. "How long were you married? Were you happy? Did he leave you anything? Was he a good man? Did you know about the rumors?" Jonah asked none of it. The horses slowed as the road climbed. Snow began sticking to the sage. Clara's stomach cramped. She pressed one hand against it, hoping he would not notice. He noticed. "There's hardtack in the coffee sack," he said. "I am not hungry." Tried again. No, lying this time. A sound came from him that might have been the beginning of a laugh, but it died before becoming one. He reached back, found the sack without turning, and handed her a wrapped piece of hardtack and dried apple. She ate slowly, embarrassed by how badly she wanted it. Near dusk, they reached a rise where the world opened into a valley of pale grass, scattered cottonwoods, and dark hills crushed beneath snow clouds. A cluster of buildings sat below, a ranch house with a stone chimney, a barn, a low bunkhouse, a smokehouse, and pens rimmed with rough rails. Lamplight glowed in 2 windows. "Hill Creek Ranch," Jonah said. It was not grand. The barn roof sagged at one corner. A section of fence leaned like an old man. Smoke came thinly from the chimney, then steadied as wind shifted. But to Clara, after 2 nights in train stations and 1 day being stared at like refuse, the sight of a lit window nearly broke her. A boy of about 10 burst from the house as the wagon rolled in, followed by a woman in a shawl. "Mr. Jonah," the boy called. "You beat the storm." "Barely," Jonah said, stepping down. "Eli, take the team to the barn. Rub them dry before feet." The boy's eyes landed on Clara and widened, but he did not stare rudely. The woman did that measuring look women do when another woman arrives unexpectedly in a man's wagon. Yet, there was no cruelty in it. "Mrs. Mercer," Jonah said. "This is Mrs. Clara Whitcomb. She'll stay in the spare room until the road clears. She'll help with copying the ledgers and whatever else needs hand." Mrs. Mercer's face softened at the word widow, though Jonah had not spoken it. "You come in out of that cold, Mrs. Whitcomb. I've got stew still warm." Clara climbed down before Jonah could offer his hand. Her legs nearly failed when she reached the ground. Jonah saw but did not touch her. He simply picked up her carpet bag and walked at her pace. Inside, the house smelled of beans, tallow candles, wood smoke, and damp wool. It was plain but clean. A long table stood near the hearth. A rifle rested above the door. On the mantel sat a small wooden horse, carved by patient hands. Beside it, a tin-type faced slightly toward the wall. Clara noticed because grief notices other grief. Mrs. Mercer took her hat and shawl. "You sit. I'll fetch a bowl. I should help. You should eat first. Then you can argue." The stew was mostly beans with a little venison and onion, but it was hot. Clara held the bowl with both hands. Eli watched her from across the table, curious but kind enough to pretend he was looking at his bread. Jonah stood near the stove, removing his gloves finger by finger. Mrs. Mercer gave him a look. "You ate today, some." "That means no. I had coffee. Coffee is not supper." Clara almost smiled into her bowl. Mrs. Mercer set food for him too. Jonah sat at the far end of the table, not across from Clara, not beside her, but near enough that she did not feel abandoned to strangers. He ate like a man used to finishing quickly and returning to work. After supper, Mrs. Mercer showed Clara the spare room. It was small, with a narrow bed, a washstand, 1 braided rug, and a quilt patched in browns and blues. A frost feather had formed at the lower corner of the window. "It ain't much," Mrs. Mercer said. "It's more than I had this morning." The woman looked at her for a moment. Mercy Crossing can be mean when it gets afraid. Afraid of what? Anything that reminds them their own luck can run out. Clara set her carpet bag on the bed. "I do not want to bring trouble here." Trouble usually finds its own horse. When Mrs. Mercer left, Clara opened her bag to make certain nothing had broken. Her Bible was there, the photographs, her spare dress, Samuel's railroad coat folded tight, a tin of buttons. At the bottom lay a small bundle of letters tied with black thread. She did not touch them. From the main room came the low murmur of voices. She heard her name once, Then Jonah's quieter reply. She works for her keep, he said. No one here speaks of her like Griggs did, Mrs. Mercer answered. I wasn't planning to, I mean anyone. That night, Clara lay under the quilt while the storm pressed against the walls. She listened to the unfamiliar house breathe around her. Wind worked at the eaves. A horse stamped in the barn. Somewhere Jonah crossed the porch, his steps slow and heavy. She should have felt frightened. Instead, for the first time since Samuel's death, she felt a door between herself and the world's teeth. By morning, the valley had disappeared beneath snow. The storm air rasped the road, softened the fence posts, and turned the barn roof white. Hale Creek itself ran dark and stubborn between shelves of ice. The horses stood steaming in the barn, and the cattle gathered in a low hollow where Jonah and Eli had thrown hay before sunrise. Clara woke before Mrs. Mercer came to knock. Habit had trained her to rise early, first as a wife trying to keep peace with a restless husband, then as a widow trying to stay ahead of hunger. She dressed in her plain gray wool, braided her hair, and stepped into the kitchen. Jonah was at the table with a ledger open before him. He had one sleeve rolled and a pencil tucked behind his ear. His handwriting marched across the page in fierce, slanted lines that looked like fence wire after a stampede. He glanced up. Morning, good morning. Mrs. Mercer stood at the stove. Can you make biscuits? Yes. Can you make them with more hope than flour? Clara looked at the near-empty flour tin and understood. I can try. That was how her first day at Hale Creek began. Not with romance, not with rescue, but with flour dust on her fingers and a practical problem to solve. She stretched the dough with mashed potatoes left from supper, cut the biscuits small, and brushed the tops with bacon grease saved in a cup. When they came from the oven, Eli declared them better than town biscuits, which seemed to embarrass him as soon as he said it. Jonah ate too and said only, good, but later, Clara saw him wrap one in a cloth and put it in Eli's coat pocket before sending the boy to help at the barn. The work found her quickly. Ledgers needed copying. Socks needed darning. The stove smoked when the wind came east. Mrs. Mercer's hands ached in cold weather, so Clara took over the wash, breaking ice in the yard pump and heating water in kettles. She learned where the coffee was kept, which hinge groaned, which floorboard near the pantry was loose, and how it coaxed flame from damp kindling. Jonah did not hover. He did not praise easily, but he noticed. On the third day, she found a broken crate beside the stove filled with ranch papers, feed bills, cattle tallies, a bank notice, and receipts from the mercantile. She sat after supper and sorted them by date. Jonah came in smelling of snow and leather. He stopped when he saw the table. I didn't ask you to do that. No. Then why? Because your January feed bill is listed under March. Your bank interest has been counted twice, and Mr. Vasse's name appears on a note you have not signed. He crossed the room and picked up the paper she indicated. His face changed. Where did you find this? In the crate. He read it once, then again. Silas has been telling folks I owe him, raising fees for the north section. I never borrowed from him. This says you did, but the signature is wrong. He looked at her. How can you tell? Your H is ugly in a consistent way. This H is ugly in a different way. Eli snorted milk through his nose. Mrs. Mercer coughed into her hand to hide a smile. Jonah's mouth twitched just once. Clara warmed from that small, almost smile more than she should have. The next days settled into a rhythm. Jonah and Eli worked outside from before dawn until the light failed. Mrs. Mercer kept the house running with a widow's efficiency. Clara copied ledgers, baked, mended, and learned the ranch by sound. The slam of the barn door, the lowing of cattle, the scrape of Jonah's boots on the porch, the soft clink of his spurs when he moved tiredly at night. Sometimes he came in with blood on his sleeve from a calf cut by wire. Sometimes his hands were cracked from cold. Once, when he thought no one saw, he stood by the mantel and touched the small carved horse with one finger. Clara never asked. Trust did not arrive as a thunderclap. It came in small exchanges. Jonah learned Clara took her coffee weak but wanted it hot. Clara learned Jonah would give the last clean towel to anyone else and use a feed sack himself. Jonah learned she hated being helped up into a wagon, but appreciated a hand down when mud was deep. Clara learned his silence was not always displeasure. Sometimes it was only a man thinking through pain before speaking. On the 6th day, a cow went down near the creek during a break in the storm. Jonah and Eli brought her to the barn with ropes and curses kept low, because Mrs. Mercer disliked foul language near the house. The calf was turned wrong. Clara heard the strain in the cow's bellow from the kitchen. She found Jonah in the barn, sleeves wet, jaw clenched. Eli stood pale near the stall. Boil water, Jonah told the boy. I can help, Clara said. His eyes flicked to her dress. This ain't clean work. Most useful work isn't he? For a moment he looked ready to refuse. Then the cow cried again, and he said, hold the lantern. She did. Then she held rope. Then she knelt in straw and blood and steam, while Jonah worked with grim gentleness to save both cow and calf. When the calf finally slid free and drew its first ragged breath, Eli whooped loud enough to shake dust from the rafters. Clara sat back on her heels, shaking and stained. Jonah looked at her across the straw. Something passed between them that had no name yet. Respect, perhaps. Gratitude. Recognition. You did steady, he said. So did you. The calf sneezed. Clara laughed before she could stop herself. Jonah stared at her as if the sound had opened a window in a closed house. That evening, he set a basin of warm water outside her door without knocking. Beside it lay a bar of good soap, not the harsh lye scrap from the kitchen. Clara picked it up and knew it had cost him something, because every good thing costs something in winter. The next Sunday, the road cleared enough for church. Clara did not want to go. Mrs. Mercer said she understood. Eli said church biscuits were better than sermons. Jonah said nothing until he saw Clara looking at her black dress, brushing the same sleeve again and again. You don't owe them your face, he said. I owe myself not to hide it. He nodded. Then we'll go. Mercy Crossing looked smaller under snow and no kinder. The church sat at the edge of town, whitewashed and plain, its bell ropes stiff with frost. People turned when Jonah entered with Clara, Mrs. Mercer, and Eli. The whispering began at once. Clara walked to a pew near the back. Jonah paused, then sat beside her. She could feel every eye like a pin. Reverend Pike preached on charity, which might have been funny if his wife had not spent the whole sermon looking at Clara's worn cuffs. After the final hymn, the congregation moved outside in clusters. Mrs. Pike approached with a smile shaped like a door closing. Mrs. Whitcomb, we hope you understand how appearances matter in a Christian town. Clara folded her hands. I understand they matter greatly to people who have little else to offer. Mrs. Pike blinked. Jonah looked down at the snow to hide whatever moved across his face. Mrs. Pike recovered. A widow under the roof of an unmarried rancher invites talk. Mrs. Mercer and Eli live there, Clara said. Still, people will wonder. Then, people might pray for better things to do with their minds. A few heads turned. Silas Voss, standing near the hitching rail, laughed under his breath. Careful, Widow Whitcomb. Mercy Crossing forgives many things, but not a sharp tongue in a plain woman. The words struck exactly where he aimed them. Before Jonah could move, Clara answered, I have been called poor, late, and unwanted in this town. Mr. Voss, plain is the first honest thing anyone has said. I can live with honest. The churchyard went still. Jonah did not defend her, not because he would not, but because she had already done it herself. As they rode back to Hill Creek, Clara expected shame to rise. Instead, she felt something almost like strength thin but real, taking root. Jonah drove with his eyes on the road. After a long while, he said, "You were wrong about one thing." "What?" "Plain ain't the word I'd use." She looked at him, startled, but he only touched the reins and said no more. The taw came in pieces. Icicles shortened along the barn eaves. Wagon ruts softened. The creek swelled and broke its skin of ice at noon, then froze again by dusk. With the road open, Mercy Crossing began sending its judgment north in small, poisonous doses. First came a note from Mrs. Pike, suggesting Clara might preserve her reputation by taking laundry from church families instead of remaining at Hale Creek. The note included no laundry. Then came word from Mr. Griggs that the railroad office had discovered additional charges connected to Samuel Whitcomb's death and effects. $26 now, not $12. Then Silas Voss rode out himself. He arrived on a red horse with silver on the bridle, and 2 men behind him. Jonah was in the lower pasture repairing fence. Clara saw the riders from the kitchen window and stepped onto the porch before Mrs. Mercer could stop her. Silas removed his hat. "Mrs. Whitcomb, you're looking improved by country air." "I have work to do, Mr. Voss." "So do I. I came for what your husband owed me." "My husband never mentioned your name." "Many men keep their shame from their wives." Clara's hand tightened on the porch rail. Jonah came up from the pasture with a hammer in his hand. He did not run. He did not need to. His presence changed the air. "What are you doing on my land, Silas?" "Collecting lawful debt." "Then bring lawful papers." Silas smiled and reached into his coat. He unfolded a document and held it out. Jonah took it, but did not take his eyes off Silas at first. Clara watched Jonah read. His expression did not change much, but she had learned him well enough now to see the anger settle low. Silas said, "Samuel Whitcomb signed a note against a portion of railroad compensation and personal property. Since the widow is in possession of his effects, I am entitled to examine them." My bag, Clara said. "Your husband's bag, perhaps? The coat, papers, anything he carried from the line." Jonah folded the document. "This note is witnessed by Riggs. Station agent's word is respectable. Riggs tried to take her carpetbag over $12. A debt is a debt." Jonah stepped closer. "You won't touch her thing," Silas's smile thin. "You're protective for a man who claims this is only employment." Clara felt heat rise to her face, not because of guilt, but because Silas had a gift for dragging clean things through mud. Jonah said, "Employment is enough reason to keep a thief off my porch." One of Silas' men shifted in the saddle. Silas lifted a hand to still him. "You have until Saturday," Silas said. "After that, I petition the court in Barlow and the sheriff comes with me." He put his hat back on and turned his horse. At the yard gate, he looked back at Clara. "Ask yourself why your husband hid things from you, Mrs. Whitcomb. A man only hides money when he stole it, or when he trusted someone else more than his wife." The riders left. Clara stood very still until they disappeared over the rise. Jonah turned. Is there anything in your bag he wants?" "No, Clara." It was the first time he had used her name without Mrs. in front of it. It made the moment more intimate and more painful. She looked down. "Samuel's work coat, letters. That is all. May I see them?" Her first instinct was refusal. Her second was fear, not of Jonah, but of what the letters might say if read in this house where people had begun to treat her as if she were worth kindness. "My husband was not easy," she said. Jonah waited. He gambled when he was restless. He promised when he was ashamed. He could be tender on Monday and gone by Thursday. After he died, men came asking for money I never knew he borrowed. I sold my wedding silver before the fever, then my mother's locket, then the trunk. She took a breath that hurt. I came here thinking At least his final wages might let me begin again without owing the world. Instead, even his death has debts tied to it. Jonah's face had gone quiet. I am sorry, she said. For what? For bringing this. You didn't forge that paper. I married the man who signed it. That ain't the same. She looked toward the road where Silas had vanished. People think it is. People think many lazy things. That evening, Clara opened Samuel's letters by lamplight. Jonah sat across the table, not touching them, until she passed each one to him. Mrs. Mercer took Eli to the other room and shut the door softly, leaving the two of them with paper ghosts. Most letters were ordinary: railroad complaints, weather, promises to send money. One apology that did not name what it was for. Then, tucked inside the lining of Samuel's old coat, Clara found a narrow oilskin packet stitched flat beneath the inner seam. Her hands went cold. Jonah brought the lamp closer. Inside were three things: a payroll receipt signed by Alden Griggs, a small survey map of the North Grade, and a certificate for railroad shares issued not to Samuel Whitcomb, but to Clara Whitcomb. Clara stared at her name. Jonah leaned forward. Did you know about this? No. He studied the receipt. This says Samuel delivered payroll cash to Griggs 2 days before the trestle collapse. But the rumor said payroll money went missing after the accident. Then Griggs lied. Why put shares in my name? Jonah examined the certificate. Maybe he meant to give you something no creditor could claim. Clara pressed her fingers to her mouth. Samuel had failed her in many ways. Yet here, hidden in a coat she nearly lost at the station, was evidence that he had thought of her at least once with care. Tears came suddenly. She turned away, embarrassed. Jonah did not speak for a long moment. Then he said, "Grief is hard when it has more than one face." She looked back at him. He was staring at the mantel, at the small carved horse, and the tintype turned partly away. "You know that," she said. His jaw shifted. Outside wind spread branches against the wall. "I had a wife," he said at last, "Miriam, and a little girl named Annie." Clara did not move. "This wasn't my first house. First one stood east of the creek. Good timber. Blue door." Miriam wanted a blue door so she could see home from the lower pasture. His voice stayed even, but each word seemed carried over broken ground. "I rode to town for medicine one winter night. Annie had croup, stovepipe cracked while I was gone. Fire took the roof before Mrs. Mercer's husband could reach them." Clara felt the room tilt with sorrow. Jonah looked at his hands. "I rode into town for supplies and came back to ashes." The echo of her own arrival struck her. Town? Supplies? A life changed between going and returning. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded once. "People said I shouldn't have left them. Some said a man knows when a stovepipe is failing. Some said God judges carelessness. Church people. Some, Mrs. Pike." He gave a humorless breath. "Among others." Clara understood then why he kept distance from Mercy Crossing. It was not merely pride, it was survival. "Did you believe them?" she asked. "For a while, and now?" He looked at her across the table. "Now I believe shame is a fire that keeps burning if folks keep feeding it." She covered the certificate with her palm. "Then we stopped feeding mine." "How?" She straightened. Fear moved in her. But so did the memory of the churchyard and the calf taking its first breath in straw. "We go to town Saturday before Silas brings the sheriff. We show the receipt. We ask why Mr. Griggs denied what he signed. We ask why Silas holds a note against money Samuel had already delivered." Jonah's gaze sharpened. "That will be public. So was my humiliation." His eyes held hers. "You don't have to face it alone." "I know." It was the first time she had said those words and believed them. Saturday came with a hard blue sky and wind sharp enough to cut tears from the eyes. They left Hale Creek after breakfast, Jonah driving the buckboard, Clara beside him with Samuel's coat folded on her lap, Mrs. Mercer and Eli in the back, because Mrs. Mercer had said, if a woman is to be judged in public, let the public see who stands with her. Halfway to town, they found the bridge over Dry Fork washed crooked from the thaw. Water foamed beneath the planks. Jonah stopped the team and climbed down to inspect it. We can cross one at a time, he said, slow. Clara looked at the swollen creek, then at the road behind them. Yeah. He turned back. Silas wins the day. I did say turn back. He led the horses himself, boots slipping on wet planks, one hand on the bridle, the other raised to steady them. Clara held her breath until all four wheels reached solid ground. When Jonah climbed back up, water soaked his trousers to the knee. You always make danger look like a chore, she said. It usually is. Mercy Crossing was crowded by the time they arrived. Word had spread. Silas had made certain of it. Men gathered outside the station. Women stood near the church steps, though no service was called. Mr. Griggs waited on the platform with a folded paper and the sheriff from Barlow, a tired-looking man named Cole, who seemed unhappy to be there. Silas stood beside him, polished and ready. Clara's stomach turned. Jonah stopped the wagon in front of the station. He did not help her down until she reached for his hand. That mattered to her. He had learned the difference between taking over and being there. Her boots touched the dirt. The whispers began. Silas removed his hat with false courtesy. Mrs. Whitcomb. Hail, I'm glad you chose not to make this difficult. Clara held Samuel's coat tighter. I chose to make it honest. That drew a murmur. Mr. Griggs stepped forward. Sheriff, the widow is in possession of property connected to an unpaid debt. Sheriff Cole looked at Clara. Ma'am, I'm here to see papers and keep peace. Nothing more, Jonah said. Good, peace is welcome. Theft isn't. Silas' eyes flashed. You use that word too freely. I use it where it fits. Clara felt the moment tipping toward men and their anger. Once, she might have let it. Once, she might have stood behind Jonah and been grateful. But rescue without dignity was only another cage, even if it had kind. She stepped forward. Sheriff Cole, she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Before anyone touches my husband's effects, I asked Mr. Griggs to explain this. She unfolded the payroll receipt. Mr. Griggs' face changed so quickly, Clara knew before he spoke. Where did you get that? In the coat you tried to hold for $12.40. The crowd stirred. Silas said, a grieving woman can misunderstand papers. Then read it aloud, Clara said, handing it to the sheriff. Sheriff Cole read. His brows drew together. Receipt of payroll funds for North Grade crew, delivered by Samuel Whitcomb to Alden Griggs, witnessed and signed, dated 2 days before the trestle collapse. Every head turned to Griggs. The station agent licked his lip, said, that does not concern this debt. It concerns the lie that my husband died with payroll missing, Clara said. It concerns the wages you told me were gone. It concerns why Mr. Voss holds a note against money already delivered to you. Silas stepped in. This is confusion. Samuel owed me separate money. Then show the original note, Jonah said. Silas produced it. Clara took one look and felt the same recognition she had felt at Hale Creek. That signature is not Samuel's. Mr. Griggs snapped. You are no expert? No, she said. I am his widow. I know the hand that wrote apologies he did not keep and promises he forgot by morning. I know the way he made his S too large and crossed his T too low. That is not his signature. The crowd fell quiet in a different way now, not cruel. Listening, Sheriff Cole compared the documents. Mr. Griggs, this witness mark on Voss' note matches your hand. Griggs' face went pale. Silas laughed, but it sounded forced. Surely a man might witness more than one paper. Jonah looked toward the church steps. Mrs. Pike was there, rigid beneath her bonnet. Reverend, Jonah called. You preached charity last Sunday. Might be a fine day to practice truth with it. Reverend Pike came forward reluctantly. He had once kept school before taking the pulpit and knew handwriting well enough to settle land contracts. He examined the note, the receipt, and Samuel's letters. His mouth tightened. "This note is doubtful," he said. Silas' charm vanished. "Doubtful is not false." "No," Clara said. "But this is." She held up the railroad share certificate bearing her name. Samuel Whitcomb hid this in his coat. Not because he stole, but because he feared men who would steal from me after his death. Mr. Griggs told me there were no wages. Mr. Voss came to claim my belongings. Both men wanted the coat where this proof was hidden. The crowd erupted in whispers. Silas moved toward her. "Give me that." Jonah stepped between them. "No," Jonah said. Silas' hand twitched near his gun. Sheriff Cole's voice cracked across the platform. "Do you not?" For a heartbeat, everything narrowed to wine dust and the space between two men. Then Silas smiled coldly. "You would gamble your ranch on a widow's word, Hale." Jonah did not look away. "I'd gamble it against yours. Careful. The bank note on your north pasture comes due soon. A man with sense might not anger those who can buy debt." There it was. The deeper blade. Jonah's ranch, already thin from winter, could be taken by men like Silas if enough pressure was brought to bear. Clara knew what Jonah might lose by standing beside her. She also knew what she would lose if she let him bear the cost alone. She turned to the crowd. "I came here hungry. I came here late. I came here with one bag and a name people were ready to spit on. Jonah Hale did not ask me to be less broken before he treated me as a person. He gave me work, not pity, shelter, not ownership. If this town thinks that is shameful, then the shame belongs to the town." Mrs. Mercer gave a soft, fierce "Amen." Clara's voice trembled but did not stop. "I will use the railroad shares in my name to settle lawful debts once they are verified. Not forged notes, not lies, and if any money remains, I will decide what becomes of it. Not Mr. Griggs, not Mr. Voss, not a church circle." Something in the crowd shifted. A woman near the pump looked down. The storekeeper removed his hat. Reverend Pike's face colored. Sheriff Cole folded the forged note. "Mr. Griggs, you'll come with me until this is sorted." Griggs sputtered. "On whose charge?" "Fraud is a start." Silas stepped back, already distancing himself. "I was misled," Jonah said. "You usually are when honesty walks in." A few men laughed. Not loudly, but enough. Silas mounted his horse with fury in every movement. Before riding off, he looked at Jonah and Clara. "This valley has a long memory," Clara answered before Jonah could say, "Oh, do widows." Silas rode out. The crowd broke slowly. Some people came near with apologies that sounded like stones dragged from deep wells. Mrs. Pike was not among them. But Reverend Pike approached Clara and removed his hat. "Mrs. Whitcomb," he said. "I spoke carelessly by silence. I am sorry." Clara studied him. Forgiveness, she was learning, did not require pretending harm had been small. "Then speak carefully next Sunday," she said. He bowed his head. "I will." By the time they returned to the wagon, Clara felt emptied out. Jonah helped Mrs. Mercer up, then Eli, then stood beside Clara. "You did it," he said. "We did." "No, I stood there." "You did it." She looked at him. At the man who had ridden into town for flour and nails and had somehow become the first steady thing in her world. "I could not have done it if you had not seen me first," she said. His expression changed, something raw crossing his face, before he turned toward the team. The ride home was quiet, not strained, full. Near the crooked bridge, snow began again, though the sky had been clear an hour before. Wind came fast from the north. By the time they reached the valley road, the storm had thickened into a white wall. They were 2 miles from Hale Creek when the lead horse stumbled. Jonah jumped down. Wheels cracked. The wagon lurched as he inspected it. cold hammered across the open land. Clara climbed down despite his protests. "We walked," she asked. "Too far in this wind for Mrs. Mercer." Eli's face had gone pale. Jonah looked toward a dark shape beyond the cottonwoods. "Old line shack, half-mile east. We can make that." They took what they could carry. Blankets, the document packet, a sack of food. Jonah lifted Mrs. Mercer down. Clara took Eli's hand. The wind shoved them sideways. Halfway to the shack, Eli slipped and cried out. Clara turned back, but Jonah was already there. He hoisted the boy against his chest and kept walking. The shack appeared slowly, a black square in white fury. Its door hung crooked. Inside there was old straw, a rusted stove, and enough chinking missing from the walls to let the storm speak through every crack. Jonah got a fire going with shaking hands. Clara knelt beside him. "Your fingers, they'll tar, fire, tar. His fingers were red and stiff. She rubbed warmth into them with a corner of blanket, while Mrs. Mercer held Eli near the fire. Jonah washed Clara's hands around his. "You shouldn't have had to walk through that. I have walked through worse. I know." The quiet way he said it undid her more than pity would have. Outside, the storm buried the road, the wagon, the tracks of where they had been. Inside, the four of them huddled close. Clara shared hardtack. Mrs. Mercer told Eli a story. Jonah fed the fire piece by piece from a broken chair. Later, when Mrs. Mercer and Eli slept, Clara sat awake beside Jonah. "You risked your ranch today," she said. He looked at the fire. "My babe, why?" He was silent long enough that she thought he would not answer. Then he said, "Because the day Miriam died, I let the town's words crawl into me. I started believing I was the kind of man who loses what he loves. When I saw you on that platform, standing there while they tried to make you small, I knew that look. I couldn't leave you to it." Clara's chest ached. "You do not lose everything you love, Jonah." His eyes met hers. The fire snapped softly. She wanted to reach for him. She did not. Not yet. Some things needed time to become clean and true. Instead, she said, "And I am not small now," he said. "You are not." The storm passed before dawn, leaving the world silent and white. Jonah walked to Hale Creek for a team, while Clara stayed with Mrs. Mercer and Eli in the shack. By mid-morning, he returned with 2 horses and a sled. Snow clung to his beard. His eyes found Clara first, quickly, as if counting her safe before he allowed himself to breathe. They reached the ranch near noon. But safety did not mean peace. A rider from town arrived the next day with news that Mr. Griggs had confessed enough to save himself from worse punishment. He admitted he had hidden Samuel's payroll receipt and denied Clara wages under pressure from Silas Voss, who had hoped to seize anything Samuel carried from the North Grate. The railroad shares were real, modest, not a king's fortune, but worth more than Clara had imagined. Enough to pay verified debts, enough to buy seed, lumber, and a future if handled wisely. More importantly, the confession cleared Samuel's name. That news struck Clara in a complicated place. Samuel had not become a saint because a lie was corrected. He had still left debts. He had still left her lonely in rooms where marriage should have offered warmth. But he had not stolen from dead men's wages, and he had tried, in his flawed way, to leave her something that could not easily be taken. She cried for him then, not as a devoted wife in a mourning picture, but as a woman releasing a knot tied from love, anger, disappointment, and the last exhausted thread of loyalty. Jonah found her behind the barn, where the creek moved dark under ice. He did not ask if she was all right. He knew better now. He stood beside her and watched the water. "I don't know how to mourn him honestly," Clara said. "My bae honestly is the only way worth doing it. He hurt me. I figured He also saved that certificate for me. Seems so. I am angry and grateful. Both can sit at the same table. She looked at him. You have learned that? I've had years. A meadowlark called somewhere beyond the cottonwoods, foolishly early for the season. Clara wiped her face. I am going to use part of the money to pay what is lawful. Part to fix your north fence. Jonah turned. No, you haven't heard the rest. I heard enough. The forged note was meant to hurt both of us. Silas will still try to buy your bank debt. If Hale Creek falls because you stood beside me, then I have let shame keep taking. My ranch is not your debt, no itch, but I can choose where to bill. His expression still. Clara forced herself to continue. Courage in public was one thing. Courage in tenderness was another. I am not offering payment for kindness. I am not settling accounts between us. I am saying I have spent years being carried by other people's decisions. Samuel's, creditors, railroad men's, town women's, Mr. Griggs, Mr. Vossi. I want my own decision now. Jonah's voice was rough. And what is it? Do you stay through spring? As paid help if that is all you want. As a partner in rebuilding if you can bear one. Not because I have nowhere else to go, though that was true once. Because I know the difference now. The difference between being taken in and being welcomed. He looked away toward the old east field. Snow covered the rise where his first house had burned. Clara had seen the place only once from a distance. A chimney standing alone. Black stones against pale grass. I don't know if I can be easy to love, he said. She breathed in slowly. There it was. Not a confession wrapped in poetry. Not a sudden vow. Just a wounded man telling the truth. I am not easy either, she said. I flinch at kindness. I count coins twice. I expect doors to close. I still hear people laughing when I try to sleep. His eyes returned to her. But I have watched you warm Eli's gloves before your own. I have watched you mend a hinge at midnight because Mrs. Mercer stumbled on it. I have watched you speak for me, then step back when I needed to speak for myself. That is not an easy man, Jonah. But it is a good one. The creek moved beneath its ice with a low living sound. He reached for her hand slowly enough that she could refuse. She did not. His palm was work rough and warm. I rode into town for flour and nails, he said quietly. I know. Didn't plan on bringing home a railroad widow. I didn't plan on needing a ride from a stubborn rancher. Stubborn, painfully. For the first time, Jonah Hale laughed fully. It was rusty, brief, and beautiful. Spring did not arrive all at once. Neither did love. It came in fence posts set straight along the north pasture. It came in ledgers balanced at the kitchen table while Jonah pretended not to admire Clara's sums. It came in Mrs. Mercer humming again as she worked, in Eli growing bold enough to ask Clara for help with reading, in a new blue door painted for the old line shack, because Clara said every place that saved a family in a storm deserved a proper door. It came when Jonah rode to Barlow and returned with the banknote, renegotiated in his own name before Silas could touch it. It came when Clara traveled with Mrs. Mercer to the railroad office and signed papers with a steady hand. It came when Reverend Pike preached on the cruelty of idle tongues and looked directly at his own congregation, until people shifted in their pews. Silas Voss did not vanish. Men like him rarely do. But he lost something more useful than money. Certainty. The valley no longer believed him simply because he spoke loudly. Mr. Griggs was removed from the station. A new agent arrived, a younger man with nervous manners and honest eyes. And the first thing he did was return Clara's overcharge with interest. One Sunday in late April, Clara walked into church wearing a blue dress she had sewn herself from cloth bought with her own money. It was not fancy. It didn't need to be. The color brought warmth to her face. and she no longer lowered her eyes when people looked at her. Mrs. Pike approached after service, stiff with the effort of humility. "Mrs. Whitcomb," she said, "the ladies' circle is gathering goods for the Watkins family. Their barn burned last week. We wondered if you might advise us on what is actually useful." Clara looked at the woman for a long moment. Then she said, "Blankets first, flour second. Pride lasts. It rarely keeps anyone warm." Mrs. Pike swallowed. "Yes, of course." Jonah, waiting near the hitching rail, heard and looked down, hiding a smile. When Clara joined him, he said, "You were kind. I was honest. Same thing, sometimes." The proposal came not in moonlight, not with music, but beside the new chicken coop while Clara held a hammer and Jonah held a bent nail. He had been restless all morning. He fixed things that were not broken. He checked the same gate 3 times. Finally, Clara set down the hammer. "Jonah hailed, if there is a snake nearby, shoot it. If there is bad news, speak it. If you are just fretting, kindly do it farther from my boards." He removed his hat. That stopped her breath. "I went to town for supplies last winter," he said. "So you have mentioned. I came back with you. You offered work. I offered work, because it was what I had the right to offer." Clara stood very still. He stepped closer. "I love you, Clara, not because you needed help, not because you were grateful. I love the woman who stood on that platform and did not break. I love the woman who held a lantern in a bloody barn, faced a town with her voice shaking, and still told the truth. I love the woman who painted a blue door on a lined shack because she believes saved things ought to be honored." Tears blurred her eyes. Jonah reached into his vest pocket and took out a small ring. It was simple silver, polished but old. "It was my mother's," he said. "I kept it put away because I thought some parts of a man's life were finished for good. I was wrong." Clara looked at the ring, then at him. "I loved before," he said. "As so did you, in your way. We carry what came before. I won't ask you to pretend otherwise. I would not know how. I'm asking if you'll build what comes after with me. As my wife, if you want that. As my equal, whether the world understands it or not." A wind moved softly through the yard, smelling of thawed earth and hay. Clara thought of the platform, the dust, the staring townspeople, Mr. Griggs holding her ticket, Silas offering $2 for her bag, and nothing for her dignity. She thought of the woman she had been, hungry and humiliated, and wished she could reach back through time and take her hand. Then she looked at Jonah, who had never once called her saved, without also treating her as strong. "Yes," she said, "I want that." His face changed in a way she had no words for. He slid the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled only a little. Their wedding was held in June at Hale Creek Ranch, not because the church refused them, but because Clara chose the place where her life had begun again. The whole valley came, or near enough. Reverend Pike married them beneath cottonwoods along the creek. Mrs. Mercer cried openly and denied it afterward. Eli stood beside Jonah with his hair slicked flat and his boots polished badly but proudly. The storekeeper brought sugar. The Watkins family brought wildflowers. Even Mrs. Pike came with blankets for a donation chest Clara had started for travelers stranded at the station. Silas Foss did not attend. No one missed him. After the vows, Jonah did not kiss Clara like a man claiming a prize. He kissed her gently, reverently, as though love were a promise to be kept by daily work. Clara held his coat in one hand and his shoulder in the other, and when the people clapped, she did not feel displayed. She felt witness. By autumn, the old Eastfield had a new house rising on it. Not large, not grand, strong enough. The door was blue. Clara used part of her railroad money to start a small account in Mercy Crossing for stranded women, widows, and children, with nowhere to sleep when trains failed them. Jonah added cattle money after the fall sale. Mrs. Mercer kept the ledger. Eli, taller now, painted a sign that read, Travelers Relief Fund. No debt taken in shame. Years later, people in Mercy Crossing would tell the story differently depending on who was speaking. Some said Jonah Hale rescued a widow from the depot. Some said Clara Whitcomb saved Hale Creek from Silas Voss. Some said a forged note, a winter storm, and a hidden railroad certificate changed the valley. Clara knew the truth was quieter. A lonely cowboy had ridden into town for supplies and found a woman the world had called unwanted. He had not carried her away from shame like a helpless thing. He had made room beside him until she remembered how to stand. And she, in turn, had walked into the burned places of his life and helped him build a door bright enough to see from the pasture. On the first snowy evening of their second winter together, Jonah drove the buckboard home from Mercy Crossing with flour, nails, coffee, and a bolt of blue cloth in the back. Clara sat beside him, wrapped in the same wool blanket he had given her on the road the day they met. The town lights faded behind them. Ahead, Hale Creek Ranch glowed warm in the valley, smoke rising straight from the chimney, the blue door waiting through the dusk. Jonah looked at her and smiled. This time, he had ridden into town for supplies and was coming home with his wife.